Hello and welcome to the Spirit Tech Hub. I'm Omer Suk, co-founder and community manager of Spirit Tech Hub, a community exploring the intersection of technology, consciousness, and spiritual experience. Today's conversation features Professor Jeffrey Gerst, a molecular biologist at the Weizmann Institute of Science and author of Bioengineering Enlightenment, the revolutionary science behind sustainable psychedelic medicine. Jeff challenges us with deep questions about the psychedelic renaissance. Can our species indeed transform into beings who act with genuine wisdom through the use of those consciousness medicines? How do we ensure these medicines reach those experiencing global trauma, not just the wealthy few? And can we indeed scale up the production of those consciousness medicines without traumatizing the biosphere? We'll explore the hidden ecological costs of psychedelic renaissance. Most users have no idea where these medicines come from, or that sourcing them from delicate ecosystems raises a troubling paradox. It would be absurd to destroy nature in our search to become a wiser species. Jeff presents a third path, using genetic engineering to produce psychedelic compounds in yeasts and plants, offering scalable and sustainable production without destroying nature. We are not here to sell enlightenment or reject wisdom traditions. We are here to ask better questions. Can these technologies support genuine transformation? Who benefits? What are the risks? And how do we navigate this landscape with wisdom? Let's dive in.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to mute us all. I have the power. And so thank you everyone for joining for our Spirit Tech Hub online meetup. We are here this evening with Jeffrey Gerst, professor from Weizmann Institute. We are in the midst of another wave of violence in the global sphere. And certainly we would it's kind of encouraging us to think about how to change our mind on the collective level. And we're going to speak about with Jeff. Jeff is molecular mostly in molecular genetics in Weizmann Institute. I understand that your lab is mainly into cell biology, RNA, and I've encountered your book, Jeff, several weeks ago, and it was like like a friend of mine pointed me to your book, and it was immediately was owned by this title, Bioengineering Enlightenment. And I started to read it, and it's indeed vibrates very strongly with our kind of themes of Spirit Tech Hub. So I'm very happy that you joined us, and we're going to dive into your book. Maybe first you can tell us a bit about your personal history and your academic history.
Okay. Well, thank you, Omer, for having me. It's a real pleasure, and I hope we won't be interrupted too much by incoming missiles and alerts and whatnot. But I think we'll be able to manage one way or another. I've been at Weizmann for like 3 decades now. So I've been a professor here in the Department of Molecular Genetics. As you correctly put it, I'm really working in cell biology with a focus on RNA, in particular RNA trafficking within cells and between cells, and how it can be useful to understanding basic biology, of course, but also how it can be used in translational work, maybe to develop new types of therapeutics for curing or treating rare diseases. So I've been here 3 decades. I did my PhD at Weizmann, by the way. I did grow up in America. I did my undergrad in America. And at the end of my undergrad, which I was actually doing marine biology, I moved to Eilat, where I started working at the marine laboratory there, which was actually involved in the sea farming. And one thing evolved into another that turned into a greater interest in terms of understanding the biochemistry of our cells, the molecular biology of cells. So after being in Eilat for 2 years, I went to do a master's in Jerusalem, And then that turns into a doctorate here in Weizmann. And it's a long story, but basically then I went to a postdoc in the United States, started doing more genetic work. And then I had a laboratory in Mount Sinai Medical School for a number of years before moving back here at the beginning of 1995.
Great. So maybe I will, because we have kind of limited time, because I would like to, us indeed, to focus on your book, because it's somewhat, it feels, I will be very interested to understand how you reach to this topic, because it's the connection is not very obvious, but indeed you are like treating bioengineering in the book, which is your related to your research, but focused on psychedelics, like, or medicinal. And you are writing in your book, that indeed humanity has become a dominant force here on Earth, somewhat like 60, 70,000 years ago. And we came here after 60,000 years, and we are in a midst of, we would say, polycrisis. And there is a lot of discussion of how psychedelics can be, in a sense, a positive force of humanity, of changing humanity trajectory. So I would like, what led you to write your book? And
Sure. Well, I guess the connection is, really comes back to my own personal background. And growing up, I grew up on Long Island outside of New York. And I remember in my childhood playing in a forest, which was behind our house, a really beautiful forest, really magical, a little scary, but a lot of fun. And basically by my 8th or 9th birthday, the land had been zoned and the forest was cut down to make, new suburbia. And at the time, of course, obviously I had no control of the event, but it was sort of a traumatic event, because someone who had been nurtured, sort of felt nurtured by the land and the nature, to see that disappear was really a shock. And I think ever since I've had this kind of idea of conservation and maybe being of service to conservation, even though I've gone off into the realm more of molecular biology, molecular genetics, cell biology. I think they always had that in me to want to sort of compensate for that and do something which is more of in service to the environment. And what happened here was actually just a consequence of going to the Psychedelic Science Conference in 2023 in Denver. And I was talking to the people there, and I was saying, we can use the psychedelics or create the psychedelics using more modern techniques, because the principal techniques are either sourcing from nature or chemical synthesis. Yet either approach is really highly detrimental. First of all, sourcing from nature is highly destructive to the local environment. It results in species depletion, and it's basically results in cultural appropriation from the indigenous societies that first discovered or developed these traditional medicines. So you can see that today, and we can go into examples later. There's a lot to unpack there, of course. But again, you're looking at a large variety of plants, animals, which are being strongly affected by sourcing from nature. And the thing is, now we're at that crossroads where psychedelics are becoming certainly more in the forefront after many years of being sort of suppressed, made illegal by the Nixon administration. You can see there's a tremendous interest now in revival into the use and research of the psychedelics. And if we want to sustain that and create possibilities of treating people on a global scale, we have to be scalable. And sourcing from nature is not scalable, not the way it's done now. And then we can talk about chemical synthesis afterwards. But I'll just get back to the conferences. Had been reading into the field and seeing that people had been cloning the genes involved in producing the psychedelics, whether it was from plants or fungi or animals, toads in particular. But everyone I talked to at the meeting had no idea what I was talking about. They had not read any of this literature. And the irony is right there, is because everyone cares really very strongly about the food they put in their body, where it comes from, how it was made, who benefited from it, and where did the money go afterwards. And that's also something one can unpack. But when it comes to the psychedelics, no one knows where they're coming from. I mean, everyone I talk to, got them from somewhere, right? But no one, unless it was their neighborhood mushroom grower, nobody knew where these medicines were coming from. They didn't know that, and they don't know the ecological or economic costs that there are incurred upon sourcing from nature in particular. And again, this is something we can talk about in terms of the individual psychedelics. But there is a tremendous cost to the environment, to the local environment, the species themselves, and the indigenous communities that had developed and could benefit from them, their use of them today. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. For example, peyote, which became very popularized, of course, by Aldous Huxley and then later Carlos Castaneda. The minute people were made aware of that, they all flooded down into northern Mexico and southern United States and Texas to pick peyote, which is fine, except peyote takes 7 to 10 years to grow. So if everyone goes down there to pick peyote, there isn't going to be much peyote. And in fact, despite some regulations in terms of limiting the harvesting, it's basically disappeared from large areas of the Southwest and even northern Mexico. And in fact, even though it has been allowed to be used as a sacrament for the Native American churches, which can use peyote as sacrament, the sourcing is still mostly coming from the wild. There's maybe some grassroots level terms of trying to grow peyote, but again, it takes many, many years. Another example is the capi vines, which people want to use to make ayahuasca. Again, something that takes 10 years to grow. And given all the interest in ayahuasca, it's resulted in basically the depletion of capi in large areas of the Amazons. And again, this is to satisfy a demand of Westerners to be able to access these psychedelics. And then a final example I'll give you, and there's plenty more, is MDMA, which is extremely popular, not only as it's not a psychedelic per se, it's an empathogen, but it's very popular in terms of being able to treat trauma and mental health issues. There's a big push to legalize that around the world, particularly in the United States, which is being overseen by the MAPS organization. But yet to produce MDMA, you start from a molecule called saffrol. And saffrol today comes from trees, comes from sassafras trees and cinnamon trees, primarily in Southeast Asia, but in other places as well. And since year 2000, over 35% of Cambodia's forests have been cut down to extract saffrol. In other words, cut down the sassafras trees, the cinnamon trees, and then cut down other trees to distill out the saffrol to be used in the production of MDMA. This is not sustainable by any means. It's not scalable and not sustainable. These trees take decades to grow. So just in those few examples there, and there's still more, we've already can see that natural sourcing is never going to meet demand. Even if it isn't legalized, it doesn't meet demand. And we can talk about iboga, we can talk about the Sonoran desert toads. All these are very limited resourced species, rather difficult to grow and maintain, and just is not a viable means of being able to generate these psychedelics. Now, you might say, well, we could turn to chemical synthesis, and that's what we do in certain cases, but chemical synthesis has its own problems in terms of pollution of the land and the water. It's done by underground pharma. The money that it's usually made to make these chemicals doesn't stay in the community. It's just going into pockets of whoever is making it. And of course, since it's been illegal for many years, it's basically, again, is something which is sort of considered a criminal activity. And another problem with chemical synthesis is that you don't have the entourage molecules that accompany the natural sources. And these are other components, not the psychedelic per se, but other molecules that are produced by the plants, animals, and fungi, which can help perpetuate or enhance the psychedelic experience. And you don't get that with chemical synthesis. With chemical synthesis, you're trying to get pure product. And that's how it's sold. It's a GMP grade, and this is the aim of pharma in the first place, is to generate pure product. So chemical synthesis could be a solution in terms of scale, but it's really not a great model in terms of, again, the pollution that it generates, including carcinogens, which are thrown into the water and into the land. And of course, again, it's underground pharma. And finally, it doesn't have the entourage molecules and natural sourcing that. So it is clear to me at the time at this meeting is that people need to know about this. There has to be a means to bring this information to people so that they can understand that there is another way. And that other way, of course, leads into the idea of doing genetic engineering. I don't know if I answered all what you wanted to know there, but this is sort of the idea of how do we move from two mainstream methods of sourcing psychedelics today to a third middle path, which is both scalable, sustainable, and basically at low user cost. And that's, again, using simple organisms to create the psychedelics.
Yeah, indeed, what drew me into reading your book was indeed the environmental aspect that you are raising, and which is not discussed like much in the psychedelic communities. And indeed, when I think about spirit tech, like technology, like the archetype of technology is the leverage. Like so, but so I wanted to ask you something. Maybe we can go a bit back and to ask why do you think that indeed psychedelics are important for humanity? Like if I can quote you from from the preface for your book, you write something that drew my attention. Like you write, uh, we might want to change our species name from Homo sapiens, knowledgeable human, to Homo concilio, which is like a human that plans or design with purpose. At least in this case, the change might absolve us of a sporadic lack of wisdom, as human history has aptly shown. Our obsession with planning for the future has clearly had negative consequences, as well as those which have benefited us. From early childhood, short and long-term planning helps condition us to be participants in the finite game of I win, you lose, and it's gone. So this is just a part from the purpose that I remember clearly, and I wanted you maybe to comment how you think indeed why do you think psychedelics are indeed important in this transition that humanity might do?
Right. Well, I think we're at this inflection point in human history where we have been so conditioned towards consumerism and wealthism that we are disconnected from our environment or natural environment. We don't really see the environment as anything but a source of our material needs. I'm speaking in very general terms, granted, but this is sort of the way human society has evolved, and I understand that. We want our creature comforts. Yet it comes all these things come at a cost. And the part of it is, again, is that our egoic mind, which has evolved over the millennia, not millions of years, really wants to, be able to satisfy needs. And these needs are sometimes based on fear, sometimes ignorance. And our conditioned mind, is still back in the Paleolithic times, if you would think about it. I mean, we've only been forming farming communities or even having a sedentary lifestyle for maybe the last 10,000 years or so. And so our brains, which took millions of years to evolve, are still back in that kind of period where we are fearful of not having enough in many ways. And I think the way society works today is to condition us to fear that we're not having enough, and that we should be, worried about being able to survive, even if everything is available to us. So it's not a rational fear, it's an irrational fear, and it's one born of ignorance. I think part of the problem, of course, is this is the way we're conditioned to become consumers. And I talk about the finite game, which is the I win, you lose kind of game. This is how I was conditioned growing up. We had to be the best in everything. And if you're not the best, you're a loser. And this is, if everyone defines their identity as being a winner or a loser, well, ultimately, everyone's a loser in the end because no one wins all the time. That's obvious, right? But it's a psychological trigger for us. And if we want to survive this inflection point where we have too much extraction from the Earth's resources, whether it's land or oceans or water, we need to be able to modify our ways, not only our ways of thinking, but our ways of doing, our ways of planning. So I did write Homo concilio. I could also call us Homo parum contentus, in other words, the discontented man, because we are discontented. This is based on our fear of lacking something, whatever that may be. It could be a physical lack or it could be a psychological lack. Psychedelics, on the other hand, are that potential bridge back to that connection to nature where we're not so egoically driven and we see that connection back to the planet to which we belong. And I think that's the benefits that psychedelics can give to us. They're not going to solve all our problems. We have to solve the problems, but they do give you that bridge back to the natural environment. And indeed, I think it comes back to the way I saw, the disappearance of the forest behind my house was the idea is we have to get back to nature and protect nature, not to destroy nature just to build more homes. And, when we were a smaller population, it wasn't such a big deal. Now we're approaching, we may have passed 8 billion souls already, and it's only growing still. And that means more extractive practices, more industrialized agriculture. We lose an area the size of Greece every single year in land management changes, deforestation, and otherwise usage of the land, which is basically coming at a cost to nature. And, half of the pre-Anthropocene forest, half the forest that was around at the end of that last ice age, was lost since 1900. 1900 alone. So we're losing the size, if you want to put it in Israeli terms, we're losing the size of forested area, the size of about half of Israel every year. And it doesn't come back unless it is managed in a proper way. So psychedelics, I think, for most people, in terms of if you read the literature and experiments, people see this as a connection to spirit. And I think our spirits are grounded in nature. And I think this is the one way we can sort of overcome that divide between our egoic consciousness and our maybe true selves.
Indeed, I think that many people that had experience with the mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms or LSD were kind of reflecting, were like a terrorist attack of spilling LSD into the water of the government or something like this. And indeed, like the dynamics of I win, you lose is when you scale it up, you get what we are currently experiencing, like global wars. And in order to make such a shift for humanity, indeed, we need loads of this kind of materials, molecules. Mm-hmm. So I would like maybe that for some of us, many of us are not familiar maybe with genetic engineering, and many people will have maybe negative tendencies and against messing with nature and things of that kind. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could allude to us for what does it mean actually to bioengineer, and specifically how do you bioengineer those materials?
Right. No, that's an excellent question. Also, there's a lot of nuances there and things we can talk about. In this case, I meant it very simply, not to bioengineer people. That wasn't the idea, though you could read that from the title as well. But the idea is to be able to take the genes which are involved in the production of the psychedelics from these organisms, whether it's fungi, whether it's plants, whether it's even Sonoran desert toads, and put these into easily grown organisms like yeast cells, which are simple to grow. These are actually a type of fungi, and also garden variety vegetables such as tomato plants or tobacco leaves or whatever it may be, which can be done today by plant geneticists who are already expert in doing this kind of work. It's not out of the realm of the impossible. It is already possible and is already being done by people, different groups around the world, even groups here at Weizmann and Volcani are interested in doing this and have done this. And the idea is relatively simple, because a lot of the genes, for example, let's take psilocybin mushrooms. It's basically, and just in general, the psychedelics basically start from 2 amino acids, tyrosine and tryptophan. These are common amino acids in our foods. And they're just modified by a series of, in case of mushrooms, only 4 different enzymes to convert that all the way to psilocybin. So and even to DMT, which is involved in the main ingredient or the main active ingredient in ayahuasca, it only takes basically 3 genes. So 3 enzymatic steps separate this amino acid from a very potent psychedelic. So in the case of, for example, the mushrooms, the psilocybe mushrooms, you have these 4 genes, which are basically clustered together on the same chromosome. And what we can do is just remove them, basically amplify them using PCR. Everyone knows what PCR is today. And we can insert them by recombination into the genome of other other plants and fungi. So, example, into yeast. And this was already done 5 or 6 years ago, the first time that it was put into yeast. And they could generate, this is done by Irina Borodina's group in Novo Nordisk in Denmark, and they were able to generate essentially gram quantities of psilocybin from these yeasts for basically in small bioreactors. And they could even tweak it so you can make higher yields. And this is, obviously, mushrooms are not endangered in any way, but yeast are much easier to grow. It grows really fast. So you can grow that much psilocybin in basically less than a week, in a few days, that it would take you 6 weeks or more of growing mushrooms in order to get that to get the same amount. So again, scalability is the answer here. And again, it's relatively simple because yeast are relatively easy to grow. It doesn't require major facilities to do that, and basically anyone could do it. And then this example holds true for basically all the psychedelics, with the exception of LSD, which has not been, which, I mean, in nature, we can make D-lysergic acid, and the genes involved in making that from fungus have also been cloned. But the diethylamide reaction is one reaction which we don't have an enzyme for today, but it's something that could be designed in the future using AI and machine learning to perhaps get to an enzyme that could do that. And the same thing is true for creating MDMA. We don't have an enzyme or enzyme array that can take saffrol and convert it to MDMA, although one can envisage certain enzymes that could do it. So it's not out of the realm, it's not in the realm of the impossible. It just has to be thought about carefully and experimented with. So I think genetic engineering, it scares some people to some extent, I suppose, although we do use it to generate crops these days that don't require fertilizers, that don't require insecticides. So, I mean, in like many human endeavors, genetic engineering is morally neutral. It all depends on how that user uses it. But otherwise, it's just a tool that we've developed, and it's a useful tool, and it can benefit everyone. And it does again allow for the ability to generate the psychedelics in a scalable and sustainable fashion, which we can't do from nature today. So again, it's a middle path, right? It may be not ideal for some people. Some people may want organically created psychedelic coming from an indigenous society, and I think that would be great. But we're not there, and we're not going to be there. We're not there now, and we're not going to be there should these medicines become fully legalized around the world. So we have to consider other options, whether we like it or not. We have to be considerate of nature and not destroy nature just to and traumatize nature just to heal our own trauma. That would be absurd.
So your book is like, I'm in the section, I think, on the chapter on MI. Yes, and I think I'm on the chapter of in which you speak on the MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned something that I wasn't aware of, that I think that the Meyer more that was used in the temple, in the ancient Canaanite times, has some small amounts of saffron, or
yes, exactly that, and the cinnamon also. So if you look in Exodus, for example, you get the basically the recipe for the anointing oil that was used in the temple to consecrate the Israelite kings, as well as the Kohanim, priests, and also used in incense as well. So you have basically the full recipe there. And if you read this recipe through from beginning to end, you see it's completely psychoactive. And not just psychoactive in the sense it's psychoactive to a very powerful extent, and even concludes cannabis, includes obviously THC, which actually has also psychedelic and hallucinogenic properties in the right concentrations. But also there's molecules there, again, these entourage molecules, which would inhibit the breakdown of these components, whether it's saffron or eugenol or even THC, in, again, the anointing oil. So anyone who would have this put on them could really be potently activated in that psychoactive sense. And if you were in the temple and you were breathing in this incense, again, it would be no different than getting really high, I would imagine. So I think this is something that was not necessarily invented by the Israelites. It could have been, the ancient Israelites, but it may have been adopted from other societies around the area, which also used cannabis. Even in the Egyptians, they also used DMT. They used, which they would get from acacia. They used blue lotus. So basically, all the original communities here had done some kind of ethnopharmacological research and were able to experiment and acquire psychoactives in order to, help create their rituals and their sacrament, and obviously consolidate their societies. Because this is another thing that psychedelics do: is encourage bonding, encourages social social bonding and social cognition in a way that allows maybe groups to be able to come together and indeed form religions. And so it's not so difficult to think that it may also have been true for Judaism.
Yes, indeed. Like for me, it was a fascinating fact, or fascinating hypothesis. I would say it's not extremely, I guess, proven that it was this was the case. Am I right?
Well, there
or
is evidence
there is evidence
from certain Beit Knesset in Israel, from synagogues,
Oh,
that they were using cannabis. Okay, whether all these
okay,
other
yeah.
materials were found there,
Yes,
that's not
I'm
necessarily
aware
clear.
of.
Right. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we may not have all the archaeological evidence in hand or paleobotanical evidence in hand, but it's pretty clear that it is happening all over the world, and it didn't matter really what society we were talking about, whether you're talking about the ancient Hindus, the Greeks, the tribes in Mesoamerica, and also the Amazons, and also in the American Southwest. I mean, it's basically every different human community and group had their own psychoactive materials,
Yeah.
and presumably
So
that
it's
played a
like,
role.
so in a sense, the search for like this kind of a new psychedelic renaissance is also, in a sense, a return to our ancient roots, like even before the rise of Abrahamic religions, in a sense. So it's kind of fascinated by itself. I
Right.
wanted though to ask something about bioengineering in particular. Like maybe it's you tell it like further in your book, but you mentioned the Sonoran toad, desert
Yes.
toad, which is
Yes.
like for someone who doesn't know, it's a toad in the Americas, and is it like North Mexico, right, or
It's the
something?
southern United States
Yeah,
mostly.
so and it produces like 5-MeO DMT in the like resins or something in its glands. And so, for example, if you want to reproduce, and this is like a very potent psychedelic drug, and
Mhm.
as you tell, it's like in order to collect it, you need to catch those miserable toads and to take their uh, but if you want to
Well,
create
you don't have to kill the toads. What people do is they milk the toads because
the milk the toad,
they have glands behind their ears, which well, parotid glands, in which they secrete uh, again 5-MeO DMT and bufotenin, which is a precursor for 5-MeO. And but the problem is that there's obviously they're also under threat, not just from milking, but also most amphibians in the world these days are under threat from climate
yeah.
change and from pathogenic fungi which attack them. And so yeah, they're basically undergoing species decline, and they live in a very limited area. So they're not a good source for DMT for sure, 5-MeO DMT. Um, and there are other sources. There are plant sources for 5-MeO DMT, and even this pathway to make 5-MeO DMT has been put into plants already.
Mm.
So that so you put them into garden variety vegetables or readily grown plants rather than trying to harvest them again from bushes or trees in nature. Acacia plants here, for example, in the Middle East, are rich in DMT. Certain ones, acacia and Mimosa hostilis. These are all trees or plants that make 5-MeO DMT, for example, or DMT at
I see.
least. Yeah. So,
So the fact that the molecule is produced in an animal doesn't restrict your ability to produce it in other life form, like in fungi
right.
or plants.
That's correct. And yeah, it's a relatively simple molecule in terms of how it is metabolized from tryptophan. And again, it just requires a few enzymatic steps, and the genes are known basically that do that. I mean, we don't have the genome from the Sonoran Desert toad yet, as far as I know, but we have the enzymes, similar enzymes from other toads. There's another one called Bufo marinus or Rhinella marinus, and we can use those known genes in order to complete the pathways, for example, if we don't know the genome yet. And I imagine we'll get the genome for the Sonoran Desert toad in a reasonable amount of time. But again, we don't really need to make 5-ANO-DMT using toads. In fact, it's also synthesized very simply chemically. So if it's a question of killing off all the toads or doing chemical synthesis, I'm all for chemical synthesis.
I vote also for chemical synthesis.
Yes.
So maybe before opening up for questions or from the community, one last question is like the vision, like where do you see it going? Like it's obviously it will be a game changer if I can buy a little pack of yeast and make I don't know what psilocybin beer in my house.
Right.
But who will lever like probably it will be companies that will it can be will they issue patents over it? Will it how will it evolve?
No, this is a huge issue now because of the way psychedelic renaissance is going, and in terms of the goal of legalization, it falls into basically the medicalization of these psychedelic medicines, what evolved originally as drugs or psychoactives used in sacrament or rituals and ceremonies, or even recreational use afterwards, is now in the world of pharma, and that's this commodification that we're seeing now. There's more than 50, companies or so working on commodifying the psychedelics, and basically this means doing some product hopping. For example, taking a known psychedelic, which is naturally created and can't be patented, but now altering the molecular structure of it, adding different chemical groups to it to make it a little bit different, sometimes to make it stronger, sometimes make it weaker, sometimes to take away the hallucinogenic effect from the psychedelic. And the idea is that we can now commodify it, and that's just commodifying the medicine itself. Then you also have within this legalization push is the idea that it has to be framed within this the usage of therapy. In other words, to get a medicine passed by the FDA, it has to be approved in terms of some kind of treatment, not just some random usage of it. And therefore, that brings us into the world of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, which is fine, but the idea is it now becomes this enterprise. And you see that around the world, there's courses now being given how to be a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. Many different places are giving courses. Many companies are trying to, again, catch on this commodification, again, by altering the psychedelics, or even creating new psychedelics. And I think one of the issues here becomes, it's understandable why we've moved in this direction. Again, we're getting back to this consumerist sort of wealth-oriented drive that we have to make a product that we have to sell and make money on, and a treatment we have to use in order to sell that product. I think this is, for me, there's a moral issue there, which is a bit problematic. And I touch upon this in the book because I think it is important, although I don't have a simple solution for it. I think what we need to do is find a way of being able to address some of the problems that happen to the indigenous communities in particular who've developed or discovered these medicines and don't get anything in return for them. So if a drug company or pharma company uses or creates a psychedelic or modifies it, nothing goes back to the indigenous societies that first found them. They don't have any prior art rights to that material, even though there are conventions which have been signed by the UN and the World Trade Organization, which allows for some kind of remuneration of these societies, but nothing's happening. A lot of the problems with these conventions is that they may protect the prior art or the intellectual property rights, or they may protect the rights of the indigenous people. They may even protect the species themselves in terms of, protection for biodiversity, but there are no rights to protect the land. And therefore, if you get rid of the land, you get rid of the species, you get rid of the indigenous community. So it's a Swiss cheese sort of model for regulation there, which is not able to provide remuneration to these societies, and plus they're losing their land in the process. So we need a real sea change, and not only in the way we make them, but also in the way we're going to distribute them. If we really want to make an effect on a global level, we're going to have to change the model. Psychedelics can't just be for wealthy people in rich countries. If that's the case, we've done nothing, because a lot of trauma occurs around the world in the poorest of places, and trauma and mental health issues are everywhere. And so we need to be able to address them at a global level. And I think this, again, was something I wanted to address in the book, and I did address it to some extent. But beyond these technological changes, again, I think we need a civilizational change in terms of, again, how we use the psychedelics, how we treat them, and how we treat each other. Because in the end, if we're going to just give it to the rich people, and I consider myself at least privileged enough to be able to have the opportunity, and probably many of you as well, we're not going to solve trauma at the global level. And this is what we need to do if we want to survive as a species. At least that's how I see it.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. So I will open up for and invite all of us members of the Spirit Hub to, or invited to open up your microphones and.
Well, maybe I've answered all the questions.
Yeah, maybe.
Hi, Jeffrey. Hi, my name's Maya. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Hi, Maya.
I'd love to hear more about your vision here for really using psychedelics as a way to help global trauma, to help the masses, to help everybody. Because on one hand, even if it's more available and it's more commercialized and at scale, right, the actual chemical compounds and whatnot, it also obviously requires intensive supervision and therapeutic work and a container and a framework in which to treat everybody. So how would that be able to be scaled as well? Like I see the part about the compounds being scaled, but how about the actual container and framework?
Right, and that's an excellent question, and not necessarily an easy question to answer. As a scientist, I can answer the technological side very carefully. But in terms of being, I'm not a therapist, for example, and I don't engage in obviously psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. I think obviously the model is being built now around, again, the legalization / medicalization of MDMA in particular, but also psilocybin, and that there will be practitioners, therapists, who are going to use the medicine within controlled environments. And this is a lot talked about in terms of the psychedelic community of set and setting, of course, the set being you and your approach or inner state towards your own mental health, and of course the setting being the external environment which you're going to be in. And I think, at least in the models that I've seen, is this is something that people want to control. Now the question is that scalable? It's probably scalable, but is it affordable? If you look at the cost of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per session. And certainly no one in Somalia or Sudan or Gaza or even here how many people are going to be able to afford that? They're not going to be able to afford that, right? I mean, I think I don't necessarily have a good answer of how we deliver it to the people, I think what's interesting is, of course, that the psychedelics have been around, and the psychoactives per se have been around a long time. We just didn't come across them. They were basically used in indigenous communities for social cohesion, for sacrament. Somehow we have to transition into that kind of same kind of state. And I think, that there is the model of using the Native American churches, which do use peyote, which makes mescaline, of course, as a sacrament. And there they do more group work. And maybe this is where it may be done. But, I don't really know. Maybe you have a better idea than I do. How do you deliver to the people in a way which is safe and accessible and effective? And this is a challenge, I think. But there are people thinking about it, maybe not, and probably more carefully and with more depth than I'm thinking about it. And I assume that there are models that could be effectively demonstrated.
Right. I guess religion could be like churches, like you say. There is, I think I read that there's like a church of ayahuasca
Yes,
in
Santo
America.
Daime, for example.
Right. There's
Right.
one death there, a mysterious death that nobody can explain. But other than that, they've had a nice track record, I understand.
Right. And I think, again, this has been underground for many years, but it's all over, and people have been using it again as part of sacrament. And maybe that's the best way to do it, because it is building a community. And if in a community, people can have that social connection, which goes counter to the alienation I think people are suffering now, partly due to the conditioning, the egoic conditioning which we've undergone, and partly due to social media platforms, which sort of trigger those kind of that kind of alienation as well. So if we can restore community and a connection to nature, then I think we have something going there. And it's a question of integrating all these things together. Maybe it begins locally, maybe it's all grassroots, or maybe it comes from top down, or maybe they just meet in the middle in terms of kind of regulation, which will be needed, ironically speaking, because it was made illegal all these years. Now we're going to regulate it. But from grassroots efforts to, engage people and help them form communities. And this may be the best way to spread it.
Does make sense also, if we're already talking about regulation, to have like protocol and actual like lab grown protocol, cultivated protocol, in which you can actually regulate the exact formulation and compounds, right? Like that actually makes sense already if we're talking about regulation, as opposed to not knowing potency if it's grown in the wild. So this is also a way towards regulation.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one way. But unfortunately, this also falls into that commodification department where, a company can again make a slightly different molecule and then charge a lot more for it. You can see for ketamine treatment, for example, they use esketamine now, which is identical to ketamine. It's just a different chiral and isomer form, and yet they can charge much, much more for it because they developed it in the lab, so to speak, as opposed to the natural ketamine, not natural, but ketamine that has been existing and couldn't be patented anymore. But I think that there will have to be some kind of regulation. There will have to be sort of, obviously, in terms of dosage, in terms of even controlling setting, so that people can do this safely and effectively. The idea is not to traumatize people using these psychedelics. I think that people have a lot of apprehension about them because they've been illegal, because they were lumped in the same category with opiates for many, many years. And I think, there's given a stigma to the psychedelics as well. But it's something that will change upon legalization, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I agree that but maybe I don't want to interrupt someone else. Eliyahu.
No, go ahead. I'll go after you.
Yeah, for me, I vibrate very much with this, with my own question. And I think that for me, one of the interesting efforts of indeed Spirit Tech is one of the themes is indeed how you can create technologies that can also support the integration and the growth that you experience after psychedelic experiences. We had one of their online meetups with Robin Arnott. He is an entrepreneur of a company called Sound Self, and where they develop a technology that kind of supports now they kind of they make research of whether their product is supportive for ketamine treatments. So I think that this kind of combination of technologies, of modern technologies with spiritual spirit molecules can be very powerful in that context.
I wanted to ask, hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much. My name is Eliyahu, and I wanted to ask if you can share something that shocked you the most while research, either by information or scale of interest. I'm really curious what you find out along the way, because I can say for myself, I wasn't aware to many things that you shared and the consequences of this supply chain and more. So if you can share about your personal that made you just, wow, I didn't know this is happening as well.
You want me to share what I didn't know before I started this? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's shocked too.
Oh, well, I would say I was just as ignorant as everyone I had talked to at the psychedelic science meeting. I didn't really realize the extent of the problem, right? I mean, you think that within a large community like that, again, there was 12,000 people at this meeting. Maybe there were a few people that didn't know. I can't say, obviously. But I talked to this book publisher there, and she said, I never heard of what you're talking about. You should write a book about it. So I said, that's when the asimon fell. This is when the coin dropped, right? That maybe I should do that. And, I think it's nice in terms of obviously trying to be of service to the world in some ways. It's giving a little back. Maybe it's small, but it needs to get out there, and I hope it will affect the change. I mean, that's the point, right? Not just to write a book for the sake of writing a book, but the idea of affecting some kind of change, this middle path, in order to be able to provide the psychedelics in a way which is just more eco-friendly, sustainable, and scalable.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. Nice to meet you, Jeffrey.
What's your name again?
I remember you from, I guess, back in 1980 or so.
You shouldn't tell us stuff like stories like this.
What's the low-hanging fruit here? So I think you've latched onto an idea that it's a space that needs to be filled. How do you begin to fill it? Is there a particular molecule you work with? How do you start the process of, kind of expanding on your idea?
Well, I think the idea has already been put into practice, that people have already created these genetically modified yeast and tomato plants and tobacco plants and whatnot to be able to create them. In terms of being able to grow them, there's really no problem. The question is how you disseminate that. Part of the wall holding things back only at this point is just the legalization issue, I think. I mean, otherwise people could go and do it. And there's some certain advantages, of course, in letting this happen maybe slowly, not all willy-nilly. And the fact is that if you get back to the indigenous communities, which are the ones which really need that sort of remuneration in order to protect their land, in order to protect their way of life, you could allow regulation, which in some ways would allow them to grow the material, train them to grow it in this way, or at least guarantee that they get some kind of recompense in terms of the sale of the psychedelic material or use in therapy. And one could easily turn that recompense into sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval, which you can now put on your organization, which is creating the psychedelic or doing the therapy, and saying that we're giving back to these original communities, traditional communities which first developed them. So the technology is already there. I mean, it's a question of how do we let it out of the bag? Who do we give it to? And what are the rules of engagement? And I think that this is something that we have to discuss. And when you have big meetings, like the psychedelic science meetings with 10,000 or more people, Then you have policy people that can come in and say, this is how we should do it. There you have pharma people which can meet and say, this is how we can do it. And then you have also representatives of these indigenous tribes there and say, how can we be participants in this? I think it's important that we gather all the different actors here or facilitators here in order to make something good come of it and not just turn into another exploitative practice, which we seem to be very good at doing. So I hope I've answered the question, at least in part. Good to see you there in Vermont, by the way.
Good to be in Vermont.
Right. It's better than being here, I can tell you that. Or at least a lot safer.
Do we have time for one more quick question?
Sure.
I recently sorry, I don't have the source. I recently, I think it was in a podcast or somewhere, read or heard that one of the indigenous tribes was actually very against the widespread use of non-ceremonial, aka therapy or even recreational use, because it's taking it out of its religious context. And therefore, they're actually happy that it's, these plants are not necessarily being able to be cultivated. There's not widespread abundance of these chemicals because it's not supposed to be that way. Nature didn't intend for that, and it's not supposed to be so widespread. It's supposed to be ceremonial and religious, and therefore, I'm just wondering if, how these I don't remember what you call them, I think indigenous or, religious leaders, how are they even receptive to wanting to grow these plants and cultivate these plants on their own?
Right.
This is something they're interested in doing.
No, it's a excellent question. It's really multifaceted. Again, it's true. There is pushback, obviously, because communities don't want to change their way of being. But unfortunately, a lot of these societies, they've been over-infiltrated by spiritual tourists. Obviously, it happened first with the Mazatec tribe in Mexico after the whole not discovery, but basically the advertisement of magic mushrooms, psilocybin containing mushrooms, came out in the late 50s. People would go down there and basically, looking to get the mushrooms, looking to use them in ceremony, looking to take them away with them. And it's not just there; it's obviously in the Amazonas as well. It's a problem in the sense that obviously traditional societies also want to survive today, but they're they're basically being exposed to all sorts of changes in land use. This is at the governmental level, particularly in Peru and also in Brazil, where there may be laws protecting the land, but they may not be enforced. The land may be taken away from them in any case. There are protections out there. And again, there's a number of UN conventions which have been signed. Not everyone has signed them, of course, but the question is, do they have any teeth and can they protect these societies? So, the idea of using psychedelics outside of the context of sacrament, outside of the original ceremonies, it's an important question. But the cat's out of the bag and it's not going to go back in. So we have to be pragmatic about how we go about doing things, I think, but also be aware of the fact that they're there. Some people are going to say as well that it's the ceremony itself which creates the psychedelic event, which creates the experience, or at least enhances it and works on the integration of the event. Some people say it's the molecule. It doesn't matter where it comes from, whether it's chemically synthesized or from a plant or from animals. And you have a lot of different opinions out there.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And even with the indigenous societies, as you said, they're not all equal in the way they want to be treated. But if you look at what's going on, particularly in Cambodia and Myanmar, where you have locals who are basically paid $5 a day to go down and cut down sassafras trees, this is, and it, again, resulting in this rampant deforestation and also species decline. There has to be a way of being able to integrate them back into the process because their livelihoods is now dependent on cutting down that tree, and we have to be able to change that. So we may take away their job by doing genetic engineering, But on the other hand, it could be extended to them in a different way so that they could be
Right.
involved in the process, or we could also engage in sustainable farming, sustainable harvesting. I mean, one approach doesn't necessarily preclude the other, and I think we have
Right.
to be really pragmatic of how we go about things.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. With that, I think it closes the loop over the cat that came out from the basket is like closes the loop over Yoav's cat in the beginning of our conversation. And so I like if maybe someone else would like to ask other last question. Otherwise, I think that we are going to thank you again, Jeffrey, for coming. It was very interesting and inspiring. And I hope you come for our next meeting. I wanted to announce that we are planning to have our next meeting, hopefully after this wave of madness, to have a physical meeting in Tel Aviv. And we're planning an interesting panel conversation with a few guests, and it will be interesting and fun evening. So I will let you know once we have our plans set right.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.